Welcome to the Naomi View A Dress Sew Along tutorial. I have got all my pieces fitted and cut out, so I'd like for you to go do the same and meet me back here so we can get started. So I'm working with two color fabrics here. This black is going to be my shell, meaning the outside of my dress, and this brown fabric is going to be my lining. I've got the front of my pieces here and my back pieces here. So let's get started on the front. So first things first is to grab your shell and you're going to open that up, right side up, and align your lining with the right side facing down. Now we're actually going to start on the V-neck. So we're going to pin along here because that's going to be the first place that we sew. And you'll also repeat this step on your back pieces. So on both of your front and back that you've just pinned, we're going to sew from the top down to your V, pivot, and continue sewing to the top. Do that on both sides. So now that you've finished that stitching, it's time to trim that seam allowance. I'm going to turn mine because I'm right-handed. So you want to trim this seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch. And then from there, you'll want to take some small scissors or a nipper and clip into that V. You're going to clip to the stitching line, not through it. You do not want to break that stitching. Okay. So I've given my seam allowance a press, and my seam allowance is pressed up towards my lining. And I've done that all the way around on both my front and back. Then from there, I'm going to flip it over from the outside. I'm going to stitch that seam allowance down through what's called an understitch. And I'm just going to stitch on my lining about 1/8 inch away from the original seam line here. So 1/8 inch onto my lining, and that's going to stitch down my seam allowance all the way around. And it's going to create a neat finish from the outside. You won't be able to see my lining. So go ahead and press your seam allowance. Do your understitching on both your front and back, and meet me back here. So after completing your understitching, we're going to finish up those straps by folding everything right sides together. And then pinning the remaining raw edges of our dress. I'm going to flip mine over to the lining. So once that understitching is finished, then you'll fold your dress right sides together. And we're going to work on closing up those straps. So you're going to pin across the short end, down the side to the underarm seam. Okay, and you're going to repeat this on the other side. So now we're going to sew this seam and across the top on both sides, and you're going to do this on both your front and the back. Okay, now that you've sewn this seam, let's give it a trim. I'm going to trim about half of that seam allowance off. So now that you've trimmed, you can do some pressing. Open it out at that underarm seam. Press that seam allowance flat towards your lining. Then flip it over and do your understitching. And you'll only be able to go so far before the straps stop you, but just go as far as you can. So you're going to do that on both sides of your underarm and on both your front and your back. So now that we've got the front and the back side of your dress sewn up around the straps, it is time to attach them to each other. So we're going to open out the dress, pick one side, doesn't matter which side. We're going to lay it out right side up. And then lay the other side, right side down. Match your lining to lining and shell to shell. Make sure the underarm seams match and line up. And then you're going to pin along the entire seam. And we're going to sew both of those seams. So now we've got our dress attached. We've sewn these long seams. We've pressed them, and I'd like you to go ahead and finish those raw edges through whichever method that you prefer. I used my serger on mine. Now it's time to turn your dress right side out. So now while your dress is still wrong side out, you can sew your hem. So we're going to hem our lining and our dress, our shells separately. You're going to turn up your hem on your lining. You can turn it up twice and top stitch it down. I'm going to give mine a press to make things nice and neat. Same thing on your shell side. You can fold it up and press 1/2 inch, fold it up and press another 1/2 inch, stitch it down and give it a press. So I've got my dress hemmed, got the shell and the lining hemmed. So now I'm gonna turn my straps first, right side out. So once you turn those straps right side out, then you can flip your dress right side out. So turn your dress right side out and give your straps a good press. Now that your straps are pressed flat, you can tie them at the shoulders so that it'll stay on the hanger. And you're done.